The gleaming marble floors of Sinclair Tower reflected the mid-morning sunlight as Thomas Walker shuffled through the revolving doors of the prestigious downtown building. The 65-story skyscraper housed some of the most exclusive financial firms and corporate offices in Boston. Its modern glass facade and state-of-the-art amenities attracting companies willing to pay premium rents for the prestigious address. At 58, Thomas had the weathered appearance of someone who had spent considerable time outdoors. His grey beard was neatly trimmed but slightly unkempt. His clothes, worn jeans, scuffed work boots, and a faded flannel shirt under an old canvas jacket, were clean but visibly dated. The worn backpack slung over his shoulder completed the picture of a man of modest means. As Thomas approached the security desk, he noticed how the immaculately dressed professionals streaming through the lobby gave him a wide berth, their eyes sliding past him as if he were invisible. The security guard at the desk, a muscular man in his 30s, whose name badge read Blake Reynolds, looked up from his computer screen with immediate suspicion. "Can I help you?" Blake asked, his voice carrying a sharp edge that Thomas immediately recognized, the tone reserved for unwelcome visitors. "Good morning," Thomas said pleasantly. "I have a meeting with Westfield Partners on the 42nd floor." Blake looked Thomas up and down, his skepticism evident. "Do you have an appointment? Who are you meeting with?" "Yes, I have an appointment with Michael Garrison at 10:30. My name is Thomas Walker." Blake made a show of checking his computer, tapping keys and scrolling through screens. "I don't see any appointment for a Thomas Walker, and Mr. Garrison doesn't typically take meetings with—" He paused, searching for a diplomatic phrase and failing. "People without prior arrangements through proper channels." Thomas reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. "Here's the email confirmation of my appointment." Blake barely glanced at the paper. "Anyone could print something like that. Listen, sir, Sinclair Tower is private property. Unless you have legitimate business here, I'll have to ask you to leave." Thomas remained calm. "I understand you're doing your job, but I do have legitimate business. Perhaps you could call Mr. Garrison's office to confirm." "Mr. Garrison is a very busy man," Blake said, his patience visibly wearing thin. "He doesn't have time for interruptions. Now, I've asked nicely, but if you don't leave immediately, I'll be forced to escort you out." Two other security guards had noticed the exchange and were now moving closer, flanking Blake. Thomas looked around at the growing scene. Business people slowing their pace to observe, receptionists at nearby desks watching with curious expressions. "I'd really appreciate it if you'd just make one quick call," Thomas tried again. Blake stood up, his imposing frame towering over Thomas. "That's enough. We don't allow homeless people to loiter in the building, harassing our tenants with made-up appointments. This is your final warning. Leave now, or we'll remove you and call the police." The word homeless echoed in the marble lobby, causing several onlookers to whisper among themselves. Thomas felt the sting of the public humiliation, but maintained his dignified demeanor. "I see," he said quietly. "I understand." As he turned to leave, a young woman in a sharp business suit approached the security desk. "Excuse me," she said to Blake. "Did I just hear you say this gentleman claims to have an appointment with Michael Garrison?" Blake nodded, his expression conveying that he was handling an unwanted situation. "Don't worry, Ms. Chen. We're removing him from the premises." The woman, evidently Garrison's assistant, looked at Thomas with uncertainty. "What was the name again?" "Thomas Walker," Thomas replied. Her eyes widened slightly. "Mr. Walker, I'm Sarah Chen, Mr. Garrison's executive assistant. We've been expecting you." She turned to Blake, her tone crisp and professional, but with an unmistakable edge. "Mr. Walker is indeed scheduled to meet with Mr. Garrison. In fact, this meeting has been on the calendar for weeks." Blake's expression shifted from confidence to confusion. "But he doesn't look like—" "Like what, mister?" "Reynolds?" Sarah cut him off. Blake stammered, suddenly uncertain. "I mean, he's not dressed like our usual visitors." Sarah turned to Thomas. Mr. Walker, I apologize for the misunderstanding. Mr. Garrison is looking forward to meeting with you. Please, let me escort you to our offices. As Thomas followed Sarah toward the private elevators, Blake called after them. Ma'am, I still need to see some ID for our visitor log. Sarah paused, looking at Blake coldly. Of course. Security protocols are important, aren't they, Mr. Reynolds, especially when applied equally to all visitors, regardless of their appearance. The rebuke was subtle but clear. Blake approached with a visitor badge and logbook. Thomas produced a driver's license, which Blake examined closely before reluctantly processing the visitor badge. Enjoy your meeting, Mr. Walker, Blake said stiffly, handing over the badge. As the elevator doors closed behind them, Sarah sighed. I'm truly sorry about that, Mr. Walker. That's not how we treat people at Westfield Partners. Thomas smiled gently. No need to apologize, Ms. Chen. It happens more often than you might think. Still, it's unacceptable. Mr. Garrison will want to know about this. Thomas shook his head. Please don't trouble him. I'm sure the security staff is just doing their job, trying to keep the building safe. Sarah looked at him curiously, but didn't press the issue as the elevator rapidly ascended to the 42nd floor. If this story resonates with you, please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and let us know in the comments where you're watching from today. The offices of Westfield Partners occupied the entire 42nd floor of Sinclair Tower, with commanding views of Boston Harbor and the city skyline. The reception area featured sleek modern furniture, original artwork, and discreet displays, highlighting the firm's 25-year history as one of the nation's premier venture capital companies. Their portfolio included early investments in numerous tech unicorns and industry-disrupting startups, with a reputation for backing visionary entrepreneurs. Sarah led Thomas through the reception area, where heads turned to observe the unlikely visitor. She brought him to a large conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows and a massive table of polished walnut. Mr. Garrison will be with you shortly, Sarah said, offering Thomas coffee or water, which he politely declined. Please make yourself comfortable. Left alone in the conference room, Thomas walked to the windows, gazing out at the city below. His reflection in the glass revealed a man who, despite his modest attire, carried himself with quiet confidence. He was examining a scale model of what appeared to be a new building development when the conference room door opened. Michael Garrison entered with the brisk energy of someone perpetually short on time. At 50, he was the picture of success. Tailored suit, designer glasses, and the assured manner of someone accustomed to making multi-million-dollar decisions before lunch. Mr. Walker, I presume, he said, extending his hand. Mike Garrison, sorry to keep you waiting. Thomas shook his hand firmly. No problem at all, Mr. Garrison. I appreciate you making time for me. Please call me Mike, and I should be thanking you for making time for us. When your office contacted me about potentially backing the Harbor Point development, I was intrigued, especially given your track record with similar projects in Chicago and Seattle. They settled at the conference table as Sarah returned with another executive, introducing him as David Kaufman, Westfield's head of real estate investments. The discussion quickly turned technical, with Thomas demonstrating a surprisingly sophisticated understanding of commercial real estate development, urban renewal strategies, and financing structures. After an hour of productive conversation, Mike leaned back in his chair, clearly impressed. I have to say, Thomas, may I call you Thomas? Your approach to mixed-income development without displacing existing communities is refreshing. Most developers talk about community benefits as an afterthought. You've clearly made it central to your model. Thomas nodded. I believe profitable development and community responsibility can coexist. It just requires more creativity and patience. Well, I'm sold, Mike declared. Westfield would be very interested in being your financial partner on Harbor Point. David will work out the details with your team, but conceptually, we're on board. They stood to shake hands just as Sarah knocked and entered the room. I'm sorry to interrupt, but Mr. Walker's driver called. He's waiting downstairs whenever you're ready." "Thank you, Sarah," Thomas said, gathering his notes into his worn backpack. "And thank you both for your time. My team will be in touch to follow up on next steps." "Before you go," Mike said, a hint of curiosity in his voice, "I hope you don't mind me asking, is there a particular reason for the—" He gestured vaguely at Thomas's attire. Thomas smiled. "Let's just say I like to see how projects and partners work in reality, not just on paper. You learn a lot about a place by how they treat everyone who walks through their doors, not just those who look like they belong." Mike raised an eyebrow but nodded with understanding. "A practical approach. Well, I look forward to working together." As Sarah escorted Thomas back to the elevator, she lowered her voice. "I reported the incident with security to our HR department. That kind of behavior doesn't align with our company values." "I appreciate your concern," Thomas replied, "but I hope no one loses their job over a misunderstanding. It's not about punishment. It's about creating a respectful environment for everyone," Sarah said as the elevator arrived. The ride down to the lobby was quiet. As they exited, Thomas noticed Blake Reynolds at the security desk, now sitting straighter and more alert than before. Their eyes met briefly, Blake's expression a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. "Mr. Walker," Blake called, rising from his chair. "Sir, I want to apologize for the misunderstanding earlier. I was just following protocols, I understand," Thomas said, stopping at the desk. "No need to explain. It's just that we get people coming in sometimes, trying to access the building without authorization and—" Thomas held up a hand, gently interrupting. "Mr. Reynolds, you're doing your job protecting this building and its occupants. But remember, security isn't just about keeping people out. It's about ensuring the right people get in and that everyone is treated with dignity in the process." Blake nodded, chastened. "Yes, sir, I'll remember that." Outside, a black Tesla Model S was waiting at the curb. The driver, dressed in a simple black suit, opened the door as Thomas approached. Several people in the lobby watched with surprise through the glass doors as Thomas settled into the luxury vehicle before it pulled smoothly into traffic. Inside the car, Thomas pulled out his phone, the latest model in stark contrast to his otherwise modest appearance, and dialed a number. "Amanda, it's Thomas. Meeting went well. Westfield is on board." He paused, listening to the response. "Yes, the usual." One security guard was particularly dismissive, but nothing out of the ordinary. Another pause. No need to make a fuss. Although it might be worth looking into the security contractor's training procedures." He glanced back at the towering building receding in the distance. "Oh, and one more thing. Let's accelerate our timeline on the Sinclair Tower acquisition. I think we've seen everything we need to see." As his car merged onto the highway, Thomas Walker, known to the broader business world as Thomas Walker Sinclair, billionaire founder of Sinclair Properties and the actual owner of the building that housed Westfield Partners, removed his worn canvas jacket, revealing a simple but well-made button-down shirt. The disguise was minimal but effective, relying more on people's expectations and biases than any elaborate deception. For the past decade, Thomas had made it a practice to visit his properties and potential investments in this unassuming manner, believing it revealed the true character of a place far better than any carefully orchestrated official visit ever could. What he had witnessed today at Sinclair Tower had confirmed his suspicions about the building's management company, a corporate culture problem that started at the top and filtered down to frontline employees like Blake Reynolds. Changes were coming to Sinclair Tower. Blake Reynolds just didn't know it yet. Meanwhile, back at the security desk, Blake was relaying the strange encounter to his colleague. "I swear, Greg, something weird is going on. The guy looked homeless, but then Garrison's assistant comes down personally to get him, and now he's driving off in a Tesla." Greg shrugged. "Maybe he's one of those eccentric tech millionaires? You know they sometimes dress like they shop at Goodwill." "Oh, maybe," Blake conceded, "but something tells me I just made a huge mistake. The following morning, Blake arrived at Sinclair Tower earlier than usual, still bothered by the previous day's encounter. He had searched online for Thomas Walker and real estate development, but found little information, just mentions of various projects and philanthropic initiatives, but no clear photos or profiles. It was as if the man deliberately maintained a low digital footprint. As Blake settled at the security desk, he noticed an unusually high level of activity for 7:30 a.m. Men and women in business attire were gathered in small groups near the reception area, speaking in hushed tones. The building manager, Victoria Hayes, was among them, looking more stressed than Blake had ever seen her. "Morning, Ms. Hayes," Blake called as she walked briskly past the security desk. She stopped, seeming almost surprised to see him. "Oh, Blake. Yes, good morning. Listen, there's an all-staff meeting at 9 a.m. in the mezzanine conference room. Make sure someone covers the desk so you can attend." "Is everything okay?" Blake asked, noting the tension in her voice. Victoria hesitated. "Just some organizational changes coming. Nothing to worry about yet." She hurried away before he could ask more questions. The morning proceeded with a strange undercurrent of anxiety throughout the building. Regular tenants arrived for work, but many seemed aware that something was happening based on the curious glances toward the unusually active management office. At 8:45, Greg arrived to cover the security desk, and Blake made his way to the mezzanine level. The large conference room was already crowded with building staff, maintenance personnel, administrative staff, cleaning crews, and the entire security team. Blake found a spot against the back wall as Victoria Hayes stepped to the front of the room. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her voice professional but strained. "I'll get right to the point. As of yesterday evening, Sinclair Tower has been acquired by a new owner." A murmur spread through the room. The building changing hands was significant news, especially since there had been no rumors of a sale in progress. Sinclair Properties has purchased the building from Madison Commercial Real Estate Trust. For those who aren't familiar, Sinclair Properties owns and manages premium commercial properties across the country. Blake shifted uncomfortably. This explained the tension. Changes in ownership often meant staff reductions or replacement of vendor contracts. "Representatives from Sinclair Properties will be on site today to begin the transition process," Victoria continued. "They've assured me that they plan to evaluate all current staff and contractors before making any personnel decisions. So I encourage everyone to continue performing your duties with the professionalism I know you're capable of." As Victoria began explaining the transition timeline, the conference room door opened. Blake's heart sank as he recognized the man entering the room, Thomas Walker, now dressed in a tailored but understated navy suit. Behind him was a small group of professionally dressed individuals carrying tablets and portfolios. Victoria's expression registered surprise, but she quickly recovered. "Ah, I believe our new ownership representatives have arrived. Everyone, this is Thomas Sinclair," the man introduced himself, stepping forward. "But many of you may know me as Thomas Walker from yesterday." The room fell completely silent. Blake felt as if the floor had dropped out from beneath him as the realization hit. The homeless man he had nearly ejected from the building was actually Thomas Walker Sinclair, founder and CEO of Sinclair Properties, and apparently the new owner of the building. "Thank you, Ms. Hayes, for starting this meeting," Thomas said. "I apologize for the surprise nature of this acquisition, but I found that observing a property in its natural state provides the most accurate picture of its operations." His eyes scanned the room, briefly meeting Blake's before moving on. "For those who aren't aware, it's my company's standard practice for me to visit each property we're considering acquiring as an ordinary visitor. What I experience during these visits heavily influences our decision-making process." Blake felt dozens of eyes turn toward him as colleagues connected the dots. His encounter with Thomas yesterday must have been all over the building's gossip circuit by now. "Sinclair Properties has a particular philosophy about the buildings we own," Thomas continued. We believe that a property is more than steel and glass. It's a community. How that community functions, how it treats its members and visitors, reflects values that start at the top and permeate throughout. He gestured to the people who had entered with him. My team will be conducting a comprehensive evaluation of building operations over the next 2 weeks. During this time, all current staff positions remain in place, though some procedural changes will be implemented immediately. Thomas pulled out a small notebook from his jacket pocket. Based on my visit yesterday, I've identified several areas for immediate improvement. First, security protocols will be revised to emphasize respectful treatment of all visitors while maintaining necessary safety measures. Second, the lobby seating area will be expanded to create a more welcoming environment. Third, we will be implementing a new tenant communication system to improve responsiveness to concerns. As Thomas continued outlining changes, Blake felt sweat beading on his forehead. His career flashed before his eyes. 5 years at Sinclair Tower, working his way up to head of daytime security, all potentially derailed by one colossal misjudgment. After the meeting concluded, Blake tried to slip out with the crowd, but he heard his name called. Mr. Reynolds, a moment, please. Blake turned to find Thomas Sinclair looking directly at him. The other staff members gave them a wide berth as they filed out of the conference room. Mr. Sinclair, sir, I want to apologize again for yesterday. Blake began, the words tumbling out. I made an inexcusable judgment based on appearances and... Thomas held up a hand, stopping him. Mr. Reynolds, I'm not interested in apologies. I'm interested in understanding. Blake swallowed hard. Understanding, sir? Yes. I'd like to understand the thought process that led to your interaction with me yesterday. What specific policies were you following? What training have you received? Who established the guidelines you were implementing? The questions weren't what Blake had expected. Rather than outright condemnation, Thomas seemed genuinely curious about the systemic factors at play. Well, Blake began hesitantly, we have general guidelines about unauthorized individuals, particularly, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully, people who appear to be homeless or soliciting. But the specifics of implementation are largely left to our discretion. And who trains the security team on exercising that discretion? Blake thought for a moment. We had an initial orientation when the security contract was awarded to Global Shield Services, but ongoing training is minimal. Mostly we're told to use our judgment to maintain the building's professional atmosphere. Thomas nodded, making notes. And when visitors don't fit your idea of professional atmosphere, the default approach is immediate removal rather than verification. Put that way, it sounded terrible, but Blake had to admit it was accurate. Yes, sir, that's generally how it works in practice, though it's not explicitly stated that way. Thank you for your candor, Mr. Reynolds, Thomas said, closing his notebook. That's exactly the kind of information I need. Blake steeled himself. Sir, am I being terminated? Thomas studied him for a moment. Do you think you should be? The question caught Blake off guard. I made a serious error in judgment that reflected poorly on the building and potentially could have cost Westfield Partners a valuable business relationship. So yes, I would understand if that were your decision. Interesting, Thomas remarked. You recognize the mistake and its potential impact. But tell me, if you were in my position, would firing you solve the underlying problem I observed yesterday? Blake considered this. No, sir, I don't think it would. The problem is more systematic. It's about training, clear guidelines, and the overall culture. Thomas smiled slightly. Precisely. Individual actions matter, Mr. Reynolds, but they often reflect broader organizational values and priorities. I'm less interested in punishing one security guard than I am in transforming how this entire building operates. He paused. That said, your specific role going forward will depend on your willingness to be part of that transformation. Hope flickered in Blake's chest. I'm absolutely willing, Mr. Sinclair. Good. Because starting tomorrow, you'll be working directly with our head of security operations to completely overhaul the visitor management protocols for this building. Your experience yesterday, from both sides of the interaction, gives you a unique perspective I want to utilize." Blake was stunned. "You want me to help develop new protocols? Even after how I treated you?" "Especially after how you treated me," Thomas corrected. "The best innovations often come from those who have experienced a system's failures firsthand." He handed Blake a business card. "Report to this office tomorrow at 9 a.m. My team will brief you on our approach at other Sinclair properties and work with you to adapt it here." As Thomas turned to leave, Blake found his voice again. "Mr. Sinclair, may I ask, why do you do this? The disguise, I mean." Thomas paused at the door. "It's hardly a disguise, Mr. Reynolds, just ordinary clothes and the absence of the trappings people expect from someone in my position." He considered the question more deeply. "I do it because the measure of a place, or a person, isn't how they treat the powerful and privileged. It's how they treat those they perceive as having no power at all." With that, he left Blake alone with his thoughts. By late afternoon, word had spread throughout Sinclair Tower about Thomas's undercover visit and the subsequent acquisition. Employees and tenants alike were abuzz with speculation about what changes might be coming. Blake found himself the subject of uncomfortable attention, some colleagues avoiding eye contact, others approaching with morbid curiosity about his encounter with the billionaire owner. "So you really tried to throw him out?" asked Diane from the mailroom during a coffee break. "The actual owner of the building?" Blake grimaced. "I didn't know who he was. He was dressed like someone who didn't belong here," Diane finished for him. "That's the point, isn't it?" said Marco, one of the maintenance staff who had joined them. "Who gets to decide who belongs in a place? Based on what? How much money they have? What they're wearing?" The conversation made Blake increasingly uncomfortable as he began to see his actions through a different lens. He had always thought of himself as a fair person, but yesterday's incident and today's discussions were forcing him to confront biases he hadn't fully acknowledged. As his shift ended, Blake noticed a flurry of activity near the main entrance. A team of workers was already reconfiguring the lobby, removing the imposing security desk and replacing it with a more approachable concierge-style station. The cold marble seating area was being supplemented with comfortable furniture arranged in conversational groupings. Even the harsh overhead lighting was being adjusted to create a warmer atmosphere. Blake paused to watch the transformation, symbolizing the broader changes coming to the building and to his own role within it. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but also an unexpected opportunity to be part of something better than what had come before. As he pushed through the revolving door into the evening air, Blake noticed a familiar figure sitting on a bench across the street. Thomas Sinclair, once again dressed in his worn jeans and canvas jacket, observing the building with quiet interest. Their eyes met briefly, and Thomas gave him a small nod before turning his attention back to the building that bore his name. The message was clear. Appearances can be deceptive, assumptions can be dangerous, and sometimes the most powerful person in the room is the one you least expect. 1 month after Thomas Sinclair's unorthodox visit to his newly acquired building, Blake Reynolds stood in the redesigned lobby of what was now officially called Sinclair Tower, surveying the dramatic changes that had taken place. The cold, imposing security checkpoint had been replaced with a welcoming concierge desk, staffed by 2 employees, one focused on security and one on visitor assistance. The previously sparse lobby now featured comfortable seating areas, a small cafe serving reasonably priced coffee and snacks, and a digital art installation celebrating Boston's diverse communities. But the physical changes were just the visible manifestation of a much deeper transformation. Blake himself was at the center of one of the most significant shifts in how the building operated. "Morning, Blake," called Sophia Williams, the new head of building operations who had been brought in from another Sinclair property. "Ready for the training session?" Blake nodded, gathering his materials. Just finished the final revisions to the presentation based on yesterday's feedback. In a turn of events that still surprised him daily, Blake had not only kept his job, but had been promoted to a newly created position, Director of Community Experience. The role combined security oversight with visitor engagement, focusing on creating a safe environment that was also welcoming and respectful to everyone who entered the building. Today's training session would be the culmination of weeks of work, developing new protocols, retraining staff, and reimagining how Sinclair Tower interacted with all its visitors, from CEOs to delivery personnel, from prospective tenants to job applicants. As Blake headed to the mezzanine conference room, where the building's entire staff would gather, he reflected on the intense month behind him. After his uncomfortable but enlightening conversation with Thomas Sinclair, he had spent 2 weeks embedded with Sinclair Properties' operations team, visiting 3 other buildings in their portfolio to observe their approach firsthand. What he discovered had challenged everything he thought he knew about building security and management. Sinclair Properties operated on a community-first principle that balanced necessary security measures with genuine hospitality. Security staff were trained in both threat detection and conflict de-escalation, with a heavy emphasis on treating all visitors with dignity and respect, regardless of appearance or perceived status. The most eye-opening experience had been shadowing Thomas Sinclair himself on one of his regular undercover visits to a Sinclair property in Chicago. Dressed in his characteristic modest attire, Thomas had entered the building and been greeted warmly by staff who had no idea he was the owner. The security team had verified his appointment efficiently but respectfully, and every interaction had been marked by genuine courtesy rather than the suspicious scrutiny Blake had previously considered standard procedure. The goal, Thomas had explained afterward, is to create an environment where security is thorough but invisible, where every person who enters feels valued, and where staff are empowered to use good judgment rather than rigid protocols. Now Blake was responsible for implementing that vision at Sinclair Tower, starting with today's all-staff training. As he entered the conference room, he saw it was already filling with employees from every department. Maintenance workers sitting alongside accounting staff, security personnel mixing with administrative assistants. This integration was another Sinclair Properties innovation, breaking down the hierarchical divisions that had previously kept different staff groups separate. "Good morning, everyone," Blake began once the room had settled. "Thank you for being here for this important session. As you all know, Sinclair Tower is undergoing a transformation that goes far beyond the physical changes you've seen in the lobby." He moved through his presentation methodically, explaining the new community experience approach and how it would affect each department. Security protocols were being redesigned to be thorough but respectful. Maintenance requests would now be acknowledged within 1 hour and addressed within 24 hours. A new tenant communication app would allow for real-time feedback and requests. But perhaps the most significant change, Blake continued, is in our mindset. We're moving from being gatekeepers to being hosts. Our job isn't just to determine who belongs here and who doesn't. It's to ensure that everyone who enters Sinclair Tower has a positive, respectful experience. During the Q&A session that followed, Blake was impressed by the thoughtful engagement from staff at all levels. There were legitimate concerns about how to balance openness with security, questions about handling difficult situations, and suggestions for further improvements. "What about homeless people?" asked Greg, Blake's former security colleague. "The old policy was pretty much remove immediately. What's the new approach?" Blake nodded, appreciating the direct question. "Good question, Greg. The new policy recognizes that we need to balance compassion with the building's function as a workplace. If someone comes in simply seeking shelter or is disruptive, we have partnerships with local support organizations we can contact to provide appropriate assistance. But we'll approach these situations with dignity and respect, not immediate expulsion." He paused, then added, "And remember, appearances can be deceiving. The person you assume is homeless might actually be a potential tenant, a client visiting one of our businesses, or, as we all learned, the owner of the building." This earned a knowing chuckle from the group. The story of Blake nearly ejecting Thomas Sinclair from his own building had become something of a legend, though Blake was still working through his embarrassment about the incident. As the training concluded and staff dispersed to their various roles, Sophia approached Blake. "Nice job. You've really embraced this new direction." "Thanks," Blake replied. "It's been quite a learning curve, but I believe in what we're doing." "Well, you'll have a chance to demonstrate that today," Sophia said, checking her phone. "Mr. Sinclair is making an official visit this afternoon. No disguise this time. He wants to see how the changes are progressing." Blake felt a flutter of nervousness. He had spoken with Thomas several times over the past month, but always in working sessions focused on specific aspects of the transition. This would be the first time the billionaire would be evaluating the overall progress, and by extension, Blake's performance in his new role. "The executive team will meet him in the main conference room at 2U, Sophia continued. "He specifically requested that you be there." Blake nodded, already mentally reviewing everything they had accomplished and what still needed work. "I'll be ready." The rest of the morning passed in a blur of activity, as Blake made final checks on all the new systems and protocols. The visitor management system was functioning smoothly, the security team was following the new engagement guidelines, and the lobby had a noticeably more positive energy than it had under the previous management. Just before noon, Blake was passing through the main entrance when he noticed a commotion near the new concierge desk. A man in a rumpled suit was gesturing animatedly while Tracy, one of the newly trained security associates, maintained a calm but firm demeanor. "Is there a problem here?" Blake asked, approaching the desk. "This gentleman is insisting on going up to Westfield Partners without an appointment," Tracy explained professionally. "I've offered to call up to verify if they can accommodate an unscheduled visit, but he's refusing that option." The man turned to Blake with obvious frustration. "I've been trying to get a meeting with Michael Garrison for weeks. His assistant keeps brushing me off, but my proposal would be perfect for their portfolio. I just need 5 minutes of his time." Blake recognized the situation immediately, an eager entrepreneur desperate for investor attention, trying to circumvent the normal channels. Under the old security protocol, this man would have been summarily ejected from the building, possibly with security escorts. "Sir, I understand how important this is to you," Blake said, maintaining eye contact and speaking respectfully, "but we need to respect Mr. Garrison's schedule as well. Tracy's offer to call up is your best option right now." The man's shoulders slumped slightly. "They'll just say he's unavailable. They always do." Blake considered for a moment. "What's your name, sir?" "Daniel Reeves." "Mr. Reeves, here's what I can offer. We'll call up to Westfield and see if Mr. Garrison or one of his associates is available. If not, I can provide you with information about their formal submission process for investment proposals. Additionally, Sinclair Tower hosts a monthly networking event for tenants and local entrepreneurs. The next one is next Wednesday evening, and several Westfield partners typically attend." Daniel looked surprised at the constructive assistance rather than immediate removal. "You'd do that?" "Of course," Blake replied. "Our goal is to facilitate productive connections, not just control access." As Tracy made the call to Westfield Partners, Blake provided Daniel with details about the networking event and the proper channels for submitting proposals. While Daniel didn't get his impromptu meeting, Garrison was indeed in back-to-back meetings all day. He left with a concrete plan for getting his proposal considered and an invitation to the networking event. "Nice handling of that situation," commented a familiar voice as Daniel departed. Blake turned to find Thomas Sinclair watching from near the cafe area. Unlike his previous visit, Thomas was now dressed in a well-tailored suit that likely cost more than Blake's monthly salary. Despite the executive attire, he maintained the same approachable demeanor Blake had come to know during their work together. "Mr. Sinclair," Blake said, surprised. "I thought your visit wasn't until 2. Thomas smiled. "Officially, it's not. But old habits die hard. I still like to observe how things actually work, rather than just getting the prepared presentation." He gestured toward the exit where Daniel had just left. "That was exactly the kind of interaction I was hoping to see. You provided security while preserving dignity. We're trying to implement everything we've learned from you and your other properties," Blake acknowledged. "It's a work in progress, but the staff has really embraced the new approach." "I can see that." Thomas glanced around the transformed lobby. "The energy in this space is entirely different from my first visit. People aren't just passing through, they're engaging with the environment and each other." He was right. Throughout the lobby, people were using the new seating areas for impromptu meetings, enjoying coffee from the cafe, or simply taking a moment to appreciate the art installation. The space had become a destination rather than merely a thoroughfare. "Would you like a tour of the other changes before your official meeting?" Blake offered. "Absolutely," Thomas replied. "And please, treat me like any other visitor. I want to experience the building as others do." For the next hour, Blake guided Thomas through Sinclair Tower, pointing out both completed renovations and areas still in progress. They visited the new community room available to all tenants for meetings and events, the modernized package handling system, and the revamped security operations center that now emphasized visitor assistance alongside traditional security monitoring. As they walked, Thomas asked thoughtful questions and occasionally stopped to chat with staff members, many of whom didn't recognize him as the building's owner. Blake noted with pride how consistently the Sinclair Tower team implemented the new protocols, regardless of who they were interacting with. When they eventually arrived at the executive conference room for the official meeting, the rest of the management team was already assembled. Expressions of surprise flickered across their faces as Blake and Thomas entered together, deep in conversation. "Ladies and gentlemen," Thomas announced to the room, "I've just had an enlightening tour with Mr. Reynolds. I must say, the transformation of Sinclair Tower in just 1 month has exceeded my expectations." The meeting proceeded with formal presentations on various aspects of the transition: financial metrics, tenant feedback, operational efficiencies. But Thomas repeatedly brought the conversation back to the human elements that Blake had emphasized in his tour. "The numbers are important," Thomas acknowledged. "But what I'm most impressed by is the shift in culture. This building feels fundamentally different now. People aren't just working here, they're engaging, connecting, and creating community." As the meeting concluded, Thomas asked Blake to remain behind while the others departed. When they were alone, Thomas sat back in his chair with a satisfied expression. "When I first visited this building, in my homeless disguise, as you put it, I was primarily conducting due diligence for the acquisition. But I was also testing something I've long believed, that how an organization treats those perceived to have no power or status reveals its true character far more than how it treats the obviously important or influential." Blake nodded, remembering his own harsh treatment of Thomas that day. "What I experienced was unfortunately common," Thomas continued. "But what's uncommon is how quickly and thoroughly you've embraced a different vision. You could have resisted the changes, gone through the motions while clinging to old mindsets, or simply left for another job. Instead, you've become one of the most effective change agents I've seen." "Thank you, sir," Blake replied, genuinely moved by the assessment. "It's been eye-opening for me personally. I never realized how much my own biases were affecting my work and the building's environment." "That's the kind of self-awareness I value," Thomas said. "Which brings me to the real purpose of this conversation. I'd like you to consider taking on a larger role within Sinclair Properties." Blake blinked in surprise. "A larger role?" "Yes. We're launching a new initiative to implement the community experience model across all our properties nationwide, Based on your work here, I believe you would be an ideal leader for this program. You understand both the old and new paradigms. You can speak authentically about the transformation process, and you've demonstrated exceptional ability to bring others along with you. The offer was so unexpected that Blake struggled to find words. Just a month ago, he had been a security guard on the verge of being fired. Now he was being offered what sounded like an executive position with a nationwide scope. I don't know what to say, Mr. Sinclair. Say you'll think about it, Thomas replied with a smile. The position would involve considerable travel initially as you help establish the program at other properties, with a home base here in Boston. Sophia can provide you with the details of the compensation package, which I think you'll find quite attractive. Blake's mind was racing. This is an incredible opportunity, sir. Of course I'll consider it seriously. Excellent, Thomas said, rising from his chair. Let me know your decision by the end of the week. And Blake, he added, extending his hand, thank you for showing that people can change, even when the initial impetus for that change is uncomfortable or embarrassing. Not everyone can turn a mistake into growth the way you have. After Thomas departed for his next meeting, Blake remained in the conference room, processing the conversation. The irony wasn't lost on him. His worst professional moment, nearly expelling the billionaire owner from his own building, had led to the greatest opportunity of his career. But more meaningful than the career advancement was the profound shift in Blake's understanding of his role and responsibilities. He had always seen himself as a gatekeeper, tasked with keeping out the undesirable elements to maintain a prestigious environment. Now he recognized the limitations and biases inherent in that mindset. His new approach, focusing on dignity, respect, and genuine assistance for everyone, had not only created a better workplace, but had also made him a better person. As Blake finally left the conference room and headed back to the lobby, he passed the spot where he had confronted Thomas a month ago. The physical space had been transformed, but the most important change had happened within Blake himself, a transformation from gatekeeper to community builder, from enforcer to enabler, from someone who judged based on appearances to someone who looked deeper for the humanity in each person who crossed his path. The next morning, Blake arrived at Sinclair Tower early, having spent much of the night considering Thomas's offer. The opportunity was exceptional, but it would mean leaving behind the team he'd built here and the work that was still in progress. As he crossed the lobby toward the elevators, he noticed an elderly woman sitting awkwardly on one of the new benches, looking confused and somewhat distressed. Under the old protocols, someone would have immediately approached to determine if she belonged there, likely concluding that she didn't and escorting her out. The new Blake paused, then walked over with a genuine smile. "Good morning, ma'am. Welcome to Sinclair Tower. Is there something I can help you with today?" The woman looked up gratefully. "Oh, thank you, young man. I'm supposed to meet my grandson for breakfast at that cafe, but I'm very early. My ride dropped me off sooner than expected, and I wasn't sure if I could wait inside." "You're absolutely welcome to wait here," Blake assured her. "Would you like some coffee or tea while you wait? I'd be happy to get it for you." "That's very kind, but I don't want to be a bother." "It's no bother at all," Blake insisted. "Part of my job is making sure everyone feels welcome here." After getting her settled with a cup of tea, Blake continued to the Security Operations Center for his morning briefing with the team. As he reviewed the day's protocols and visitor logs, he found his mind returning to Thomas's offer. The incident in the lobby had crystallized something for him. This work mattered, and he was good at it. The opportunity to expand this approach to other buildings, to transform more spaces and mindsets the way Sinclair Tower had been transformed, was both exciting and meaningful. By the time he finished the briefing, Blake had made his decision. He would accept Thomas's offer, but with one condition: he wanted to stay involved with Sinclair Tower as his home base, continuing to refine the model here while implementing it elsewhere. The transformation they had begun was too important to step away from completely. That afternoon, Blake scheduled a meeting with Sophia to discuss his response to Thomas's proposal. As he walked through the lobby toward her office, he passed the elderly woman he had helped earlier, now chatting happily with a young man who was clearly her grandson. "Mr. Reynolds," she called out as he passed, "thank you again for your kindness this morning. I was telling my grandson how wonderful you were." The young man extended his hand. "James Chen, sir. I work at Westfield Partners upstairs. Thank you for taking care of my grandmother. Not every building would be so accommodating. We're working to make sure that Sinclair Tower isn't like every building," Blake replied, shaking his hand. "Everyone deserves to feel welcome and respected here." As Blake continued to Sophia's office, he reflected on how this small interaction represented everything they were trying to achieve. The elderly woman had been treated with dignity. Her grandson, a valuable employee of an important tenant, had noticed and appreciated that treatment. And Blake himself had experienced the satisfaction of doing the right thing, not because of who someone was or what they could offer, but simply because it was right. This, he realized, was Thomas Sinclair's true genius. Understanding that treating people well wasn't just morally correct, it was also good business. By creating environments where everyone felt valued, Sinclair Properties was distinguishing itself in the competitive commercial real estate market while also making a positive impact on countless daily interactions. In Sophia's office, Blake outlined his decision to accept the new role with his proposed modification. She smiled knowingly. "I had a feeling you'd say that. Thomas anticipated your request to maintain connection with this property. He's already approved a structure that would keep you based here while you implement the program elsewhere." "He thought of everything, didn't he?" Blake said with a chuckle. "That's why he's Thomas Sinclair," Sophia replied. "He sees opportunities and connections others miss, including seeing potential in a security guard who made a very human mistake." 6 months later, Blake stood in the lobby of Sinclair Tower, Denver, observing the space with a critical eye. As the now established Director of Community Experience for Sinclair Properties, he had spent the past half-year traveling to properties across the country, implementing the model that had been pioneered in Boston. Each building presented unique challenges and opportunities, but the fundamental approach remained constant, creating environments where security coexisted with hospitality, where efficiency didn't compromise humanity. Denver was the 7th property to undergo the transformation, and Blake was pleased with the progress. The local team had embraced the new protocols with enthusiasm, and early feedback from tenants and visitors had been overwhelmingly positive. His phone buzzed with a text from Thomas. "How's Denver coming along?" Blake typed back, "Ahead of schedule. Team here really gets it. Should be fully implemented by month end." Thomas's reply came quickly. "Excellent. Board meeting next week. Tenant satisfaction metrics up 32% across reform properties. Security incidents down 24%. Cost neutral with increased tenant retention. Community experience model proving highly successful." Blake smiled at the confirmation of what he was seeing anecdotally on the ground. The approach was working, not just as a feel-good initiative, but as a measurable business success. A second text from Thomas followed. "Also, new disguise test next month. Thinking delivery driver or maintenance worker. Interested?" Blake laughed out loud, drawing curious glances from people passing through the lobby. Thomas had continued his undercover boss visits to Sinclair Properties, but now Blake occasionally accompanied him, both of them adopting unassuming personas to experience their buildings as ordinary visitors would. It had become something of a tradition between them, a reminder of how they had first met, and the lessons learned from that encounter. "Count me in," Blake replied. "But no homeless disguise for me. Too close to home." Thomas's final text arrived. "Fair enough. Remember where we started, but focus on where we're going." That evening, as Blake flew back to Boston, he gazed out the airplane window at the darkening landscape below. From his privileged position at 30,000 feet, it was impossible to distinguish between the wealthy neighborhoods and the struggling ones, between the influential people and those without power. From above, the artificial distinctions humans created seemed arbitrary and insignificant. He thought about how differently his life might have unfolded if he had treated Thomas Sinclair with dignity that day, not because of who he turned out to be, but simply because it was the right thing to do. The lesson wasn't that you should be kind to homeless people because they might secretly be billionaires. It was that you should be kind to everyone because their outward appearance and status have no bearing on their inherent worth as human beings. As Sinclair Tower came into view during his taxi ride from the airport, its illuminated top floors visible from miles away, Blake felt a sense of pride in how far they had come. The building was no longer just a prestigious address. It had become a community hub where people from all walks of life were treated with the same respect and consideration. The security guard who greeted him at the entrance, a new hire Blake had personally trained, didn't recognize him in his casual travel clothes and gave him a friendly but thorough security check before allowing him to proceed to the elevators. Blake couldn't help but smile at the perfect execution of the protocols he had helped develop. "Thank you for visiting Sinclair Tower," the guard said as he returned Blake's ID. "Have a wonderful evening, sir." "Thank you," Blake replied. "You're doing a great job." The guard beamed at the unexpected compliment. "Just trying to make sure everyone feels welcome here, no matter who they are." As Blake rode the elevator up to his office, he reflected on the ripple effects of transformation, how changing one person's perspective could change a building, which could change a company, which could change an industry. All because a billionaire had the wisdom to dress down and experience his own building as a perceived nobody, and a security guard had the humility to learn from his mistake and grow beyond it. The doors opened to the executive floor, now Blake's professional home, and he stepped out into a space that symbolized his journey from gatekeeper to leader, from excluding to including, from judging appearances to honoring the dignity inherent in every person who crossed his path. If this story taught you something valuable, please share it with others who might benefit from its message. Like this video, subscribe to our channel and join us next week for another true story about the unexpected ways our words and actions can change lives, including our own. Thank you for watching.